Michael Kremer, Premio Nobel de Economía 2019, conectado a través de la plataforma virtual. Nació en Nueva York, Estados Unidos. Es economista. Obtuvo su PhD en la Universidad de Harvard. Es además cofundador de PAT, organización que aprovecha el crecimiento del teléfono móvil para dar servicios de asesoría a pequeños productores rurales. Es el fundador y presidente de World Tech, una organización en Harvard la cual envía estudiantes o recién graduados como profesores universitarios voluntarios durante un verano o en programas de un año a países en vías de desarrollo en todo el mundo. El 14 de octubre de 2019 fue laureado con el Premio del Banco de Suecia en Ciencias Económicas en memoria de Alfred Nobel por sus estudios experimentales para aliviar la pobreza global. Con ustedes, Michael Kremer, Premio Nobel de Economía 2019.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's an honor to address Your Excellency, President Benitez, and the First Paraguayan Congress of Researchers, Producers, and Policymakers. Apologies that I'll be speaking in English. Paraguay has experienced impressive growth and development, averaging around 4% growth in the years running up to COVID-19, with poverty falling by half since 2002. But there are still challenges to be addressed. Levels of informality are high. Learning levels in education are lower than in some neighboring countries, and 1 in 4 people are still below the national poverty line. Today, I will discuss how governments, like that of Paraguay, can use social innovation to address these issues and employ the experimental method to accelerate the cycle of developing, testing, refining, and implementing new ideas. Innovation is a key driver of long-run economic growth. Studies often show that research and development has huge returns to investment. One study estimated 55% social returns to investments in innovation. However, while the social return to innovation is extraordinarily high, the private returns to investment in research and development are considerably lower. That's because other firms may benefit from some of the technological advances. Consumers may benefit. And that means that there's a role for governments to support investments in innovation. Then within the broad category of innovations, some particular types of innovation, including social innovations, are particularly underfunded by the private sector. It's hard for a private sector firm to capture the full social return from an innovation to make the social safety net more efficient, reduce waste, to increase learning levels in public schools, or to match informal workers with jobs. So there's a particularly strong need for public support for innovation in these areas. But of course, there's a danger of simply wasting funds, or worse, in the name of innovation, scaling up counterproductive ideas. Therefore, it's important to start small, be humble, rigorously test our ideas, potentially refine them, or even go back to the drawing board based on the evidence, and then focus efforts to scale up ideas based on evidence of impact and cost effectiveness. So for a particular ministry trying to address social issues with limited resources, evidence-driven social innovation can be hugely valuable. First, by investing modest amounts in evidence-driven innovation, it's often possible to find ways to substantially increase the impact of programs within a given budget. Second, if you can find ways to use resources more effectively and demonstrate that, finance ministries may also be more supportive of programs with that solid evidence of outsized impact. So I'd like to first discuss why the experimental method is a useful tool for innovation, and then briefly discuss two ways to operationalize this: government innovation units and tiered evidence-based innovation funds. So I have a bit of trouble advancing my slide. Great. So when I began doing experiments, I mainly thought of them as a new way to understand and isolate the causal impact of a policy or program from potential confounding factors. But I now see them as a way of doing a new kind of economic research, simultaneously advancing scientific understanding, policy, and innovation. I think of them much more like A/B tests than something at the end of a policy process. Now, being able to isolate causal impact is indeed a powerful tool. Field experiments have frequently shown that policies have very different effects than we believed based on non-experimental correlational evidence. But I've realized that experimental method can also be used as a tool for innovation. So just as medical researchers use randomized trials to develop new medicines, and just as technology firms use A/B tests to develop new products, we can use it to develop, test, and refine innovative policies or social innovations. I think this is in part because the process often involves designing experiments focused on specific practical problems. Second, experiments are inherently collaborative. Often they require collaborations between researchers and policymakers. And I think those collaborations are often very valuable. Finally, the experimental method enables iteration. One experiment might test the impact of a multifaceted program. A second might seek to understand which components drive the effects. A third might examine if the program could be improved with some small changes to program design, or if similar results hold at scale. In this way, experiments don't just tell us the effect of a program, but they can help refine and improve a program. So let me go on to the two ways that governments in countries like Paraguay can use the experimental method to develop social innovations to address issues like education, health, and livelihoods. One approach is units within government which develop and explore innovations to improve government programs or operations. And a good example of this is Chile's government innovation. Similar programs exist in multiple countries like the United Kingdom or the United States. Both have what's been called nudge units. But let me discuss the program in Chile. So this program involves collaboration between internal investigators and external academic advisors. It uses the experimental method to test and refine existing government programs or new public programs that are innovative. Each project requires support from the relevant ministries to go ahead. Let me give some examples. So one program involved providing taxpayers with information regarding the distribution of public expenditures made with their taxes. And the evaluation found that receiving a report significantly increased perception of transparency and confidence in the state. The program had larger impacts on people with higher incomes who paid more taxes. And this program's been scaled. It's a very inexpensive program. The program's been scaled up to reach 3 million taxpayers. Another program provided independent legal defense to children and adolescents in alternative care settings. And the aim was to safeguard children's rights and promote a return to the family, as well as access to services. And the evaluation found that the program increased the probability of returning to family of origin, 127%. And there was also a statistically significant reduction in criminal cases against youth over the age of 12. That was a 74% number. That program has also been scaled up in Chile. Let me discuss two programs that this office is conducting that are still in progress. One provided asset transfers, business training, and psychological training to low-income individuals in Chile to try to promote increased labor income and business activity. And the results from that are expected in September. And another one that's still in progress tested the modified national cash transfer program for low-income populations that are for low-income workers who are formally employed. So under the current version of that program, the benefits are paid by employers, but the Chilean government was interested in examining the impact of paying the eligible workers directly. So they're testing that, and the results are expected in July 2022. So these are examples of some programs that Chile has decided to test, but through their government innovation. Let me discuss another type of institution, which is tiered evidence-based innovation funds. So I helped found one of these in the United States called Development Innovation Ventures, which is part of the United States Agency for International Development. The French government recently launched the Fund for Innovation and Development, chaired by Esther Duflo. So how do these work? Well, they also support social innovations, but the main difference between these tiered evidence-based innovation units and government innovation units is that these programs are open to many different kinds of innovations, rather than focusing on just changes to government programs. So innovations can be proposed by researchers, by private companies, or by NGOs, as well as, of course, by the government. They can be designed to scale not just through governments, but also through the private sector or through NGOs. Now, the approach is that DIV, and I'm describing the limits when the program started. By the way, if people are interested in applying, they can look this up on the web and submit proposals. So DIV has tiered funding. There's relatively modest amounts of funding to pilot and to test new ideas. The larger scale was reserved for innovations that already have strong evidence of impact and cost effectiveness, and was designed to help transition those to scale. Again, the dollar limits have changed. I'm putting the dollar limits from when the program started. DIV, I'll explain why in a moment. DIV has funded all kinds of innovations. One example is a software system to help community health workers work more efficiently. And that's been adopted by health workers serving more than 60 million clients. So we recently, because the program is now a bit over a decade old, we decided to go back and try to look at what was the impact of the portfolio overall and to address two questions. So we took a look at our early portfolio. So there's been time for innovations to scale. And first we wanted to ask, is social innovation a good investment? Do the benefits of the program outweigh the costs? And second, which innovations scale? So what was our methodology? Well, we look at the total cost of the portfolio, and then we estimate a lower bound, sort of an extremely conservative estimate on the social benefits of the investment. And we're excluding some components, but we ask whether, even if we exclude those components, is the benefit that we can quantify greater than the cost? And if so, this seems like a worthwhile investment. If not, then there'd at least be doubt about that. Now, why are we looking at this lower bound? Well, let me show you the reason, and I'll also show you something that one should recognize as a fact about supporting innovation of any type. So this chart shows that the total number of people reached by each of the 41 innovations that were supported through DIV in its first couple of years. And what you'll immediately see is a very skewed distribution. Most of the innovations did not reach 1 million people, but there were some that reached, there were 9, in fact, of these 41 that reached over 1 million people. Those 9 are responsible for 98% of the total people reached. And it would be the same thing if one were a venture capital firm. You know that many of your investments are not going to be spectacular successes. But if you're a venture capital firm and you invest in Google, then you're doing well, even if some of the other investments didn't work out as well. Okay? So then once we know which 9 to focus on, then we tried, where possible, to quantify the benefits. Now, in some cases, we didn't have the data, or there were just conceptual problems. Some of these were about trying to improve vote counting, for example, and it seemed successful at that, but we couldn't put a financial value on that. So there were 5 of the 9 where we could put a financial value, or we could put quantify the health impact, and using some procedures which are standard in health economics, if a bit questionable from a philosophical point of view, we were able to quantify the benefits of that as well. So if you look at these innovations in red, those are the ones we quantified. And what did we find? Well, the benefits were much, much more than the costs. So the cost of the portfolio, including the administration costs, were about $16 million. The net discounted benefits of just these 5 innovations were $280 million. That means that a lower bound on the benefit cost ratio was 17. So I think there's potential for these types of social tiered evidence-based social innovation funds. And it may make sense for other countries to think about setting these up. We found that innovations were much more likely to scale if they were low cost, and these were innovations aimed at low and middle income countries. We found that the innovations that were sold to firms or governments were much more likely to scale than the innovations where the firm had to go out and directly interact with customers and pay those customer acquisition costs. And then finally, we found that the innovations were much more likely to scale if they had a previous randomized controlled trial. And I think that provides, obviously I'm somewhat biased here, but I think it shows that rigorous research is not something that is opposed to speed and scale, but it's actually something that can be used in the service of speed and scale, much as we've seen in the use of A/B testing by technology companies. Okay. So what are the implications? Well, first, evidence shows that private sector leaves many socially beneficial innovations unexplored. Government investments in innovation can have large benefits. The highest potential is in areas where the social value of innovation exceeds the commercial value. So, for example, programs targeting the poor, environmental programs, and low-cost innovations involving randomized controlled trials and research were most likely to reach scale in our study. That suggests there's a room for partnerships between government innovation units and academic researchers, as in Chile, or to take another example, the state of Tamil Nadu in India established one of these, or for social innovation funds of the type that I've been involved in. Thank you very much.